Aggression in the sports world. Finally, an area in which aggression is common in everyday life is sports events, which provide a context for aggressive behavior by performers as well as spectators. As Russell 1993 noted, outside of wartime, sports is perhaps the only setting in which acts of interpersonal aggression are not only tolerated but enthusiastically applauded by large segments of society. Moreover, using the language of war is a common feature of the rhetoric surrounding sporting events. In this section, we review the limited body of psychological research on aggressive behavior among performers as well as spectators who witness aggressive behavior in the sports arena. A clear example of aggressive behavior by athletes is shown in Figure 7.4. Aggressive behavior in the sports context needs to be distinguished from competition and assertive behavior motivated by the desire to win. In line with Terry and Jackson, 1985, aggression in sport may be defined as harm-inducing behavior bearing no direct relationship to the competitive goals of sport and relates, therefore, to incidents of uncontrolled aggression outside the rules of sport rather than highly competitive behavior within the rule boundaries. Two forms of aggression can be observed among competitors in sports events: instrumental aggression, carried out in order to promote the chances of winning, and hostile aggression, arising from the desire to harm another person as an expression of negative feelings. Although it is often difficult to distinguish between these two kinds of motivation, behaviors such as illegal tackling, tripping, or holding an opponent would be examples of instrumental aggression, whereas behaviors such as shouting at the referee or hitting a teammate are examples of hostile aggression. Aggression by competitors. As with aggressive driving, predictions of aggressive behavior in sport can be divided into two categories: personal characteristics of the actors involved and contextual variables such as aggression levels inherent in different sports or the outcome of contests in terms of defeat or victory. Among personal variables, several studies have identified gender as a marker of differences in the perceived legitimacy of aggressive behaviors and in the perpetration of aggressive acts. For example, male basketball players rated rule-violating behaviors as more legitimate than did female players. In an observational study including 90 soccer games and 90 handball games in France, Coulomb, Cabegno, and Rassel 2006 found that male players committed more acts of both instrumental and hostile aggression than did women across local, regional, and national levels of competition in both types of sport. In a study with male hockey players, Weinstein et al. 1995 showed that endorsement of a masculine gender identity was related to aggressive playing behavior, and that more aggressive players were rated as more competent by teammates as well as coaches. With regard to personality variables, Bushman and Wells 1998 found that individual differences in high school ice hockey players' levels of trait aggression were related to the penalties they incurred during the season for aggressive behavior, e.g. tripping, whereas no correlation was found with penalties for non-aggressive rule breaking, e.g. delaying the game. Significant correlations were found by Maxwell 2004 between athletes' tendency of anger rumination and their self-reported aggressive behavior. Furthermore, several studies have found increased alcohol use among athletes in team sports. Together with the strong evidence linking alcohol use to aggression, this may explain increased levels of aggression both on and off the field, as documented in the review by Sonderland et al. 2004. A study with over 2,000 athletes in amateur sports found that higher habitual alcohol use was significantly associated with intentional acts of violence during the sports activity in the past year, and with a range of aggressive behaviors outside the sports context. Another line of research has examined whether engagement in certain forms of sport is linked to a higher tendency to show aggressive behavior outside the sports context. For example, Andressen and Olweus 2005 found that boys engaged in power sports that involve physical fighting, such as boxing, wrestling, and martial arts, scored higher on measures of violent behavior than did boys not practicing these sports, and showed a significant increase over time not seen in the non-participating group. They explained the association by two complementary factors: the exposure to aggressive role models and the practicing of physical aggression. However, a meta-analysis by Goebbels et al. 2016 found little overall evidence for an aggression-enhancing effect of martial arts, and another meta-analysis by Harwood et al. 2017 even found some evidence for a reduction in youth externalizing behavior through participation in martial arts. Further research is needed to clarify for whom and under what conditions engagement in martial arts may lead to negative or positive outcomes. In terms of contextual risk factors, Reifman et al. 1991 and Larrick et al. 2011 found that the higher the temperature on the day of the match, the more aggressive acts baseball players committed against fellow players. This finding is consistent with other research on the heat hypothesis. Frank and Gilovich, 1988, reported a series of studies which showed that the color of the team's outfit was linked to players' aggression, in particular the color black. They argued that the color black is associated with connotations of evil and badness, and should therefore serve as a cue affecting both the perceptions of others and the player's self-concept. In the first study, they established that those teams in the National Football and Hockey Leagues who were wearing black were rated as more malevolent by participants who knew little about either sport and simply had to rate the teams based on photographs of their uniforms. The second study used archival records from 15 years of National League matches to demonstrate that teams who wore black received more penalties than their opponents, who wore uniforms of other colors. Two teams had switched from non-black to black uniforms during this period, and that change was accompanied by an increase in the number of penalties they received. In a further experimental study, students who were knowledgeable football fans and experienced referees watched identical football scenes that were manipulated, such that the players wore either black or white outfits. Across two different episodes of playing, both students and referees indicated a greater willingness to assign penalties to the teams when they were wearing black than when they were shown in white outfits, although the actions on the pitch had been exactly the same. The effect was even more pronounced among the referees than among the students. The findings for the referees are shown in Figure 7.5. In the final experiment, Frank and Gilovich, 1988, made participants wear either black or white sports shirts when choosing games in which they wanted to compete against another team. The games on offer were selected so as to differ in terms of aggressiveness, e.g. a dart gun duel or a putting contest. Participants were asked to choose 5 games, and the aggressiveness level of the 5 choices was used as a measure of aggression. Before donning the black or white shirt, each participant made a choice of games while wearing their normal clothes, and when they put on the black or white shirts, they were told that they would from then on be referred to as the black team or the white team. The findings are shown in Figure 7.6. The participants wearing black shirts and being referred to as the black team chose significantly more aggressive games than did the participants wearing white shirts and being called the white team. However, the groups did not differ in the choices made under individualized conditions when they were wearing their normal clothes. For a discussion of the role of uniforms in undermining people's sense of individuality and adherence to personal norms to create a state of de-individuation, see Chapter 10. The findings by Frank and Gilovich, 1988, indicate that the color black is an aggression-related cue that affects people's self-perceptions and the way in which their behavior is judged by others. Figure 7.5. Experienced referees' ratings of aggressiveness of football teams wearing black or white uniforms. The y-axis is measuring aggressiveness ratings from 0 to 8, and the x-axis has 2 categories in the side-by-side bar graph of Episode 1 or Episode 2, and the bars are either black uniform or white uniform. So in Episode 1, the people in the black uniform were more aggressively rated, and as well as in Episode 2. Aggression by spectators. A second body of research has assessed the impact of watching sports aggression on spectators' aggressive tendencies. Simons and Taylor, 1992, pointed out that sports which require extensive physical contact are more likely to elicit aggressive tendencies in the spectators. Arms et al. 1979 found that participants exposed to a wrestling competition, stylized aggression, or an ice hockey match, realistic aggression, subsequently showed greater hostility and punitiveness, i.e. the tendency to assign harsh sentences to individuals convicted of serious crimes, than spectators of a swimming contest, non-aggressive condition. This finding directly contradicts the notion of symbolic catharsis derived from psychoanalytic theorizing, which suggests that aggressive tension may be reduced by observing aggressive sports. Interestingly, Juan et al. 1999 showed that individuals who engaged in or liked to watch aggressive sports particularly adhered to the idea that aggressive tensions may be relieved through sporting activity. Several other studies reviewed by Russell 2004 further supported the claim that the more aggression is shown by the players, the more aggression is displayed by those who are watching. Catharsis: release of aggressive tension through symbolic engagement in aggressive behavior. Figure 7.6. Students' choice of competitive games differing in level of aggressiveness as a function of wearing black or white shirts. On the y-axis is aggressiveness level of chosen games from 100 to 140, and on the x-axis, it's a side-by-side bar graph. The two categories are individual condition, no shirts, and group condition, shirts, and the two sets of bars are white shirts and black shirts. So in the individual condition where people are wearing their own shirts and they're not de-individuated, there's no difference in the game's level of aggressiveness that they chose. But with the group condition where they're wearing white shirts or black shirts, the people wearing black shirts had an aggressiveness level of 135 in the games they chose, whereas the people in white shirts only had an aggressiveness level of 115. So wearing a black shirt and being referred to as wearing black clothing also made you choose more aggressive games to play. There is evidence that aggression, which builds up in the context of watching a sports event, may spill over into other domains. Sash and Chu, 2000, analyzed police records spanning a 3-year period to examine the association between football events and the number of police calls to a domestic violent incident. They found that the number of police dispatches was higher at weekends than during the rest of the week and, more importantly, that the increase was substantially greater for weekends when there was a football event than for non-football weekends. A similar association was reported by Adubato, 2016. Contextual factors such as the outcome of the game and alcohol use were found to play a role in a file analysis of discipline cases at a university in the U.S. over a period of 4 years. Coons et al. 1995 discovered that significantly more discipline incidents occurred during football weekends than during non-football weekends and during home games compared with away games. Perhaps counterintuitively, the number of discipline events was significantly higher when the team had won than when it had lost the game. Almost half of the incidents involved the consumption of alcohol, highlighting the link between alcohol and aggressive behavior. A similar finding was reported by Moore et al. 2007 for rugby fans who were surveyed after a match that ended in a victory, a defeat, or a draw of their favored team. Those in the victory and draw groups rated themselves as more aggressive compared with a group of fans who were surveyed before the game, but those in the defeat group were not. Addressing changes in physiological responses, Bernhardt et al. 1998 conducted 2 studies in which they measured the testosterone levels of spectators at a baseball match, Study 1, or a televised World Cup football match, Study 2, both before and after the match. They found that testosterone levels increased from baseline among those participants who saw their favorite team win and decreased among those who saw their favorite team lose. Given the link between testosterone levels and aggression, these findings can help to explain why aggression may be increased more by a victory than by a defeat of the spectator's favorite team. Over the course of 2 seasons, White et al. 1992 found significantly higher rates of women admitted to hospital for domestic violence injuries after victories of the local football team than after lost games. To explain their findings, the authors suggested that viewing a hypermasculine activity in which force is used to successfully overcome others increases the likelihood that male spectators will become physically aggressive with their partners. However, it should be noted that the data are only correlational, showing a covariation between wins and losses on the one hand and domestic violence incidents on the other, and therefore they do not provide evidence of a causal influence of game outcomes on fans' perpetration of domestic violence. With regard to personal characteristics, the gender difference found for aggressive behavior by competitors is mirrored among fans. Male adolescents rated aggressive behavior in a range of different sports scenarios as significantly more legitimate than did their female age-matched peers. Juan et al. 2003 found that men reported a significantly greater likelihood than did women that they would commit anonymous hostile acts of physical aggression, e.g. trip the star player of the rival team, and even murder the star player of the rival team. For both genders, however, positive correlations were found between identification with their own team and willingness to commit acts of hostile aggression towards the rival team. Fan identification has consistently been identified as a predictor of aggressive behavior. Van Heel et al. 2007 showed that the more football fans identified with their favorite team, the more physical and verbal aggression they reported showing in the context of football matches. In a field study, Juan et al. 1999 asked spectators at a college basketball match to complete a measure of how much they identified with their team prior to the match. After the match, participants indicated how many acts of instrumental verbal aggression, e.g. yelling at an official, opposing player, or coach because they thought this would help their team to win, and hostile verbal aggression, e.g. yelling at an official, opposing player, or coach because they were mad at him or her and wanted to show their anger, they had shown in the course of the match. Fans who identified strongly with their team reported significantly higher rates of both instrumental and hostile verbal aggression than did fans who identified less strongly. A subsequent study found that fans who identified strongly with their team were more likely to commit anonymous acts of physical hostile aggression against the rival team when their team had lost than after a victory. Fan identification with a team not only predicts the behavior of individuals, but is also crucially important for understanding the problem of collective spectator aggression, or hooliganism, which is notorious in the context of football matches. Several studies have found a link between trait measures of physical aggression and involvement in sports riots. In their explanation of football hooliganism, Murphy et al. 1990 have argued that this phenomenon is a form of aggression typically shown by young working-class males. They identified a subculture of aggressive masculinity, predominantly but not solely lower class, which provides the normative framework for the violent behavior shown by football fans. Alcohol use and the level of violence on the pitch exacerbated the influence of masculinity norms on spectators' aggressive behavior. The significance of violence condoning social norms and explaining football hooliganism was also apparent in an Italian study, in which violent fans cited solidarity with the fan club as their primary motive for participating in disturbances around football matches. The assertive nature of the game itself, as well as the aggression displayed by the players in the course of the match, provide additional cues that may reinforce aggressive tendencies in the spectators. In addition to considering the individual actor, examining hooliganism as an intergroup phenomenon helps us to understand aggressive escalation in the context of football matches. Scott et al. 2001 provided a qualitative analysis that compared the behavior of English and Scottish fans during the 1998 Football World Cup in France. They sought to understand why the English supporters were repeatedly involved in violent clashes with local youths, whereas the Scottish supporters were not. Stott et al. Identified situational variables such as perceived hostility from the outgroup and lack of police protection against illegitimate violent outgroup activities that led English fans to close ranks and view their aggressive responses as legitimate. By contrast, Scottish fans perceived their relationship with the local youths as friendly and legitimate, and were disapproving of violent behavior shown by members of their in-group. The Scottish supporters cited a further reason for abstaining from aggressive behavior, which is interesting from an intergroup perspective. One of them was quoted by Stott et al. 2001 as saying, "No one causes trouble at Scottish games anymore because it makes the English look bad." This statement shows that the dynamics involved in the regulation of intergroup conflict need to be examined not just in the immediate relationships between the groups involved, but also taking into consideration the more complex issues of strategic differentiation from third parties. We shall look at other forms of intergroup aggression and discuss theoretical explanations of intergroup behavior in more detail in Chapter 10. To address the problem of violence associated with sports events, a variety of strategies and control mechanisms have been implemented. These include legal measures, such as banning identified hooligans from attending matches or prohibiting the sale of alcohol before matches, and organizational measures, such as enforcing strategic seating arrangements for opposing fan groups and segregating rival fan clubs on their way to and from the stadium. See, for example, in the UK, the Violent Crime Reduction Act 2006 and the 1989 Football Spectators Act. In addition, measures can be directed at athletes as well as at spectators to promote anger management or induce positive affect that is incompatible with anger responses. Finally, the strategic positioning of peaceful role models in aggressive crowds may be an effective approach, which is suggested by social learning theory, but systematic evaluations in the context of sporting events have yet to be conducted. Summary: aggression is a widespread feature of many domains of public life. The school, the workplace, the road, and the sports arena are environments in which aggressive encounters are common. A large body of research has examined the prevalence and potential risk factors of these forms of aggression. School bullying is a form of aggressive behavior that is characterized by an imbalance of power between aggressor and victim, and by occurring over a prolonged period of time. It can take the form of both physical and relational aggression, and is recognized as a problem across many countries. Cyberbullying is a new form of harassment involving the use of electronic devices that allows perpetrators to remain anonymous and reach a larger audience. Some studies suggest that the experience of being bullied in school makes victims vulnerable to long-term psychological problems, including an increased risk of suicide and later experience of bullying in the workplace. Workplace bullying refers to behaviors intended to make another person feel miserable at work over prolonged periods. Like school bullying, it is defined by a power differential between victim and perpetrator, and it is more prevalent in environments characterized by a high level of work stress. Sexual harassment is a specific form of workplace bullying and consists of sex-related behaviors that are unwanted by the recipient or perceived as hostile, offensive, or degrading. It is directed primarily at women and is more common in male-dominated work environments. Workplace bullying has been linked to significant impairments of victims' job satisfaction and psychological well-being, and it is also costly at the organizational level in terms of high rates of absenteeism and turnover. Aggressive driving is a significant safety hazard on the roads. It is more common among male than female drivers, and its prevalence decreases with age. Personality variables, such as trait aggression and trait anger, are associated with aggressive driving behavior, but situational variables, such as anonymity and frustrating traffic conditions that impede progress, are equally important. These conditions contribute to the experience of driver stress that lowers the threshold for aggressive behavior. Therefore, strategies for reducing driver stress may also be effective in reducing aggressive driving. like listening to their favorite music. Aggression by competitors in sports events can be based on either instrumental or hostile motives. Male athletes show a greater acceptance of aggression and are also more likely to engage in aggressive behavior on the field compared with females. Aggressive cues, such as black uniforms, have been found to increase aggressive behavior and to affect the perception of behavior as aggressive by third parties. The impact of observing aggression on spectators has also been widely demonstrated, and there is evidence that it may spill over into other forms of aggression, such as domestic violence. The extent to which spectators identify with their team is an important aspect of understanding fan aggression and the dynamics of aggressive confrontations between rival groups of fans.